It's already hard as it is to present in your first language, whether that language happens to be English, French, Mandarin, Japanese, and the list goes on. But what about speaking in a second or third language? I personally speak 3 languages, and my whole life I've struggled presenting in French and Tamil, which are the other 2 languages I speak. And that's exactly why, for everyone out there who speaks English, for example, as their second language at work, or is struggling with presenting in different languages, this video is for you on this week's episode of Master Talk. Hi everyone, my name is Brendan. I'm the founder of Master Talk, your go-to channel to mastering your talk. Et aujourd'hui, on va parler de comment communiquer dans une langue secondaire. So let's get into it. Number 1, write out your entire speech in your first language. If you remember from previous episodes of Master Talk, you know that for most of my life, I've presented in French despite English being my first language. And the biggest issue when you speak in different languages that you're not familiar with entirely is always vocabulary. There's always a word that you want to say in your first language, let's say it's English, but you don't really know what the translation is or the right wording is in French or in other languages that you may speak. That's why my advice is just to write out everything in your first language so that you're super comfortable with it, and then translate that script later into the language that you're going to speak. So for instance, there's quotes that I've used in case competitions that have served me really well. So business competitions that I used to do in university. And those competitions, the quotes are really powerful, but they might not be as powerful in a different language. So let's take my Amit Kalandri quote, which is, if you fulfill the wishes of your employees, they in turn will fulfill your vision. That translated into French is not as clean or as powerful. That's why my first tip is to simply write out everything word for word in your first language. Number 2, get a vocabulary boost from people whose native language is the language you're going to be speaking to. So back to what I was saying before, once you have that speech written out and you start translating it into the language you're going to speak, so let's use me as an example. English is my native tongue, so I'm going to learn it in English and I'm going to write it out in English, but then I want to present it in French. So then I translate it into French, and then I bring all my worst critics, all the people who are going to be honest with me, whose first language is French, and then attack my presentation, give me feedback on it more specifically. So then I would speak to them in French, and the big advantage they would have to me and for me is that they would look at my presentation and say, Brendan, what you're saying here doesn't make that much sense in French. You should say this instead. And that is the benefit since their first language is French. Another way of looking at this is they are a reflection of the people you're going to be presenting to. Because if they think that there's differences in the way that you speak, or it doesn't necessarily match with their language, then it's not going to match with your actual audience either. So find that vocabulary boost, find those right people, and align your script with what your audience wants to hear in their own language. Memorize first and then mesmerize. At the beginning, it is perfectly okay to memorize your speech in a second language. And the reason is because you're not very comfortable speaking in that language. My personal examples, when I was in grade 2, 3, and 4, and I gave presentations in French and I wasn't too familiar with the language, I would always memorize my speech. And that's totally fine at the beginning. But what I will say is after you're done memorizing and you start becoming a lot more comfortable with the way that you speak, and you start understanding the different types of words or vocabulary in the second language you want to present in, then you don't need those training wheels anymore. So then when it's your 10th, 15th, or 20th time presenting in that second language, you won't even need to write out your scripts anymore, and you'll be a lot more comfortable on stage. But don't forget that memorize first, and then when you master that, mesmerize. As always, if you enjoyed this week's episode of Master Talk, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well to see more videos like this. And I'll leave you off on this note. As someone who's been presenting in my second language my whole life, it's always been a struggle. So if I can figure it out, I am 100% sure you can master your talk and communicate in any language that you're familiar with. Take care, everyone. Have a fantastic week, and see you next time on Master Talk.